Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the most dramatic moments in history. Today, we're journeying back to 17th century Russia, to the dawn of a new era forged by one of its most formidable and controversial rulers, Peter the Great. We often hear about his efforts to modernize Russia, but there's a darker, more brutal side to his reign that truly reveals the iron will behind the reforms. We're talking about the Streltsy Uprising of 1698, a bloody rebellion that met an even bloodier end, with the Tsar himself acting as judge, jury, and executioner. So, let's set the stage. The year is 1698. Peter is on his Grand Embassy, a groundbreaking tour of Western Europe. He's learning shipbuilding in Holland, observing naval tactics in England, and soaking up every bit of modern technology and culture he can find. His goal is to drag Russia, kicking and screaming if necessary, out of its medieval past and into the modern world. But back home, discontent is brewing. The Streltsy, an elite corps of musketeers in Moscow, were once the backbone of the Tsar's military power. However, under Peter, they felt their influence, privileges, and traditions being eroded. They were being relocated from their homes in Moscow to the frontier, their pay was often delayed, and they deeply resented the influx of foreign advisors and the new, Western-style military units Peter was creating. For them, Peter's reforms weren't progress. They were an attack on their very way of life and on traditional Russian values. Fueled by rumors that Peter had died abroad and been replaced by a German impostor, and encouraged by whispers from Peter's politically ambitious half-sister, Sophia Alexeyevna, who was confined to a convent for regiments of the Streltsy mutinied, they abandoned their posts on the border and began marching on Moscow, intending to overthrow Peter's government and, they hoped, restore the old order. Peter's loyal generals, however, acted swiftly. They met the rebels about 25 miles west of Moscow and, after a brief and one-sided battle, crushed the uprising. The rebels were rounded up and imprisoned, their mutiny seemingly over. But for Peter, it was just the beginning. News of the rebellion reached him in Vienna, cutting his Grand Embassy short. He rushed back to Moscow, not just as a ruler, but as a man consumed by a cold, calculating fury. He didn't trust the initial investigation. He was convinced this wasn't just a simple mutiny over pay and conditions. He saw it as a deep-seated conspiracy aimed directly at him and his vision for Russia. He was determined to rip the conspiracy out, root and stem, and make an example so terrifying that no one would ever dare challenge him again. What followed was a spectacle of state-sanctioned terror unlike anything Moscow had ever seen. Peter initiated a new, far-reaching investigation. He personally oversaw the interrogation of thousands of Streltsy soldiers. These weren't simple question-and-answer sessions. Torture was the primary tool used to extract confessions. The dungeons of the Preobrazhensky Prikaz, Peter's political police headquarters, echoed with the screams of men being flogged, broken on the wheel, and subjected to fire and iron to force them to name accomplices, especially any high-ranking nobles or members of the royal family. Peter's half-sister, Sophia, was a prime suspect. Though no concrete evidence ever proved her direct involvement in ordering the march, Peter was convinced of her guilt. He forced her and two of his other sisters to become nuns, permanently removing them from political life. But his vengeance against the soldiers themselves would be far more direct and gruesome. The trials were a mere formality. The sentences were a foregone conclusion. And then, the executions began. This wasn't a quiet, hidden affair. Peter turned the punishment into a horrifying public lesson. In the autumn of 1698, hundreds of Streltsy were led to execution sites across Moscow. Some were hanged, others were beheaded, and this is where the story takes its most chilling turn. Numerous historical accounts, including the detailed diary of an Austrian diplomat named Johann Georg Korb, who was in Moscow at the time, claim that Peter the Great did not just order the executions. He participated in them, fueled by rage and, according to some reports, large quantities of brandy. Peter allegedly took up an axe himself. Imagine the scene, Red Square, packed with silent, terrified onlookers. The Tsar of all Russia, the man meant to be the holy father of his people, standing on the scaffold, his fine clothes stained with blood, personally beheading the men who had dared to defy him. He reportedly ordered his nobles, his boyars, to do the same. Many were clumsy, unused to the grim task, turning the executions into prolonged and agonizing butcheries. It was a test of loyalty. To refuse was to cast suspicion on oneself. They were being forced to physically participate in the destruction of the old guard, symbolically severing their ties to the past with every swing of the axe. The purpose was clear: to terrorize and to subjugate. This wasn't just justice, it was a political statement written in blood. Peter was demonstrating, in the most visceral way possible, that his power was absolute and that resistance was not only futile but would be met with annihilation. The macabre spectacle didn't end with their deaths. Peter ordered that the bodies of the executed Streltsy be left hanging outside the walls of the Novodevichy convent, where Sophia was imprisoned. The corpses were left to rot 4 months through the harsh Russian winter, a constant, gruesome reminder of the fate of traitors. Over 300 bodies dangled from the convent walls. One report even claims that 3 rebels were hanged directly outside Sophia's window, with one of them holding a petition in his dead hands, a final, mocking gesture. The heads of many of the executed were placed on spikes and displayed prominently throughout Moscow, on Red Square and along major roads. For the citizens of the capital, the message was inescapable. Every trip to the market, every walk through the city was a reminder of the Tsar's wrath. This was the price of challenging Peter's new world. In total, well over 1,000 Streltsy were executed. The corps itself was completely disbanded, its very name erased from the Russian military. Their families were exiled from Moscow, their property confiscated. Peter had not just defeated a rebellion. He had surgically removed a piece of Russia's past that stood in his way. This event is a stark reminder of the brutal reality of autocratic power and the human cost of rapid, forced modernization. While we admire Peter the Great for building St. Petersburg, creating a navy, and opening Russia to the West, we must also remember the terror he used to achieve his goals. He was a visionary, yes, but also a tyrant. He built his new Russia on a foundation that was, in part, cemented with the blood of those who resisted his vision. The execution of the Streltsy wasn't just a punishment. It was a brutal and unforgettable act of political theater designed to ensure that the story of Peter the Great would be one of uncontested power. Thank you so much for joining us on this dark journey into Russia's past. What do you think? Was Peter a necessary monster or a brutal tyrant? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this piece of history as fascinating as we did, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive. We'll see you next time.